Here's a question from Tracy. A Jehovah's Witness asserts that Jesus cannot be God because he didn't know the time of his return. Is there a better, more complete way to explain the kenosis, Philippians 2, other than to say simply that Jesus was speaking from his humanity when he said he didn't know?
Well, the reason I'm pausing here is because I think that answer is completely adequate. All right? I think the answer is completely adequate to the task. If somebody doesn't like that, I don't know that there's some better answer that's going to be more persuasive to them. All right? If you're going to critique a view and find fault, you have to find fault with the view itself, not something else. Okay? And on our view, Jesus is the God-man, all right? That means he has human qualities, and he has divine qualities. Since he is one person, that is the second person of the Trinity, with two natures, the native divine nature that he has had from, can't say from the beginning, can I? From eternity past, and the nature that was added to him at the incarnation, which is the human nature. Notice I'm speaking very carefully to get it just precisely right. God didn't become a man in the sense that he changed into a human being. He rather added the human nature to the divine nature in the single person of the Word. All right? So we have the God-man, two natures. And when we read in the text, we read all kinds of unusual. It's the idea that he didn't know the time of his second coming is only one of many examples of where his human nature is expressed. Jesus got tired. Does God get tired? No. Jesus wept. Does God weep? Only in poems. Okay? He can't weep if he doesn't have a body to shed tears, but Jesus wept, all right? And all manner of human emotions are expressed, and behaviors. Jesus walked from one place to another. Does God walk? No, he doesn't walk anywhere, all right? So yet, it says that this one called the Word in John chapter 1, who took on a human nature, John 1:14, is the one who made everything that has ever been made, John 1:3. And by the way, verse 3 in John chapter 1 is unequivocal. All things came into being through him. Well, that ought to be adequate. But then John says the same thing another way. And apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. So what you have here is, by biblical proclamation, clear, and in the Jehovah's Witness Bible, they haven't tampered with that verse, at least last I looked. So even in their Bible, you have the Word, who is the uncreated creator, verse 3, who became flesh, verse 14, and then that fleshly one had human limitations. All the rest of the Gospels where all of these human qualities are expressed. Even though there are references that fit his divine nature. Before Abraham was, I am. What do Jehovah's Witnesses do with that? Something about Jesus existed before Abraham. And that's precisely the challenge that was offered by the naysayers in John chapter 8. Oh, you knew Abraham, you're not even 30 years old, or whatever they say, something like that. They refer to his human nature, and then they challenge how his human nature could have known Abraham. And he says, before Abraham was, I am, using the egoemin, the Greek characterization that really amounts to Yahweh. I am that I am, all the way back to Moses, the burning bush, in Exodus 3 or 4. And so there you have, right there, probably in their own Bibles, a clear, unequivocal reference to two aspects of Jesus, of the person of Jesus, a physical nature and a divine nature. So I don't know why that isn't an adequate explanation of why Jesus didn't know the time of his return at the time he was being asked. I think he knows it now because he's not in the kenosis or the emptying of prerogatives of divine nature. He doesn't empty himself of his nature, or he can't. It's not possible. If you empty yourself of your nature, you cease to exist because your nature is who you are. Okay, he emptied himself of the privileges. He stepped down. He got small, is the way I put it in the story of reality. So I don't know why that's an inadequate response for some Jehovah's Witness. Now, he could disagree with our theology, but he's going to have to do it from the text. The problem is that every time he goes to the text, he finds two different things that seem to be characteristic of Jesus, a human nature and a divine nature. It's all over the place. And the only way to make sense of that part of the revelation, which even a Jehovah's Witness says is from God, so you're not dealing with an outsider here. This is, in a certain sense, an inside discussion since we share a revelation. They've got a problem we don't have because they can't make sense of those verses properly understood or plainly understood. They're not tricky, given their theology of who Jesus is as a created being. But we can make sense of all of them. This is why I've frequently said the Trinity is a solution. It's not a problem. It makes sense of all of the passages. It creates harmony of the revelation.
That's really helpful, Greg, because I think what's behind this question with the Jehovah's Witness is the idea that Jesus isn't God. So that is what is behind the specific question he's asking. So the suggestions you gave for how to respond to that, I think, are really helpful. And you have a piece called Deity of Christ, or is it Deity of Christ, Case Closed?
Yes. Where
you show how to use a napkin and draw a little diagram there from the beginning of John to show how Jesus cannot be a created being. I think that is a great way to go with this one.
Yeah. Given the words, and this is the key here, that diagram is meant to capture the precise language John uses in John chapter 1, verse 3. And you can use the Jehovah's Witness Bible to accomplish the same end. Okay, but it's because John is so airtight in the way he speaks twice and says the same thing from a different angle that there can be no confusion about what he's saying. This point that you have made, Amy, that they start with the presumption that Jesus isn't God is really important. When you look at the early church, what they did is they started with Jesus. They didn't start with the idea that Jesus wasn't God. They started with Jesus. And they looked at everything he did and he said, and they tried to make sense of it. Now, the earliest, that would be the most primitive characterization of the early church of Jesus was very simple. Jesus is Lord. Now, when you say Jesus is Lord, they don't mean Jesus is Mr. or Sir. Sometimes when there's a word Lord used, it means that. But you cannot substitute Sir for all the times that Jesus is characterized as Lord. It makes no sense. Okay? And so the early church began to understand that this man, clearly a physical human being, was the Lord. He was God. And they began to understand it because of the things that he said about himself and then the things that he did to verify what he said. And so we don't have a concept of Trinity in our mind and then come back to the man Jesus and impose it on the man Jesus and find things that sound like he's God to confirm our doctrine of the Trinity. Rather, the way it happened historically is the people encountered Christ. And then this was the one they encountered, and it took them a while to try to formulate this in a way that kind of made sense, a couple hundred years. But it was clear they understood Jesus was a man, and he's the Lord, not a Lord. He is the Lord. Look it up, all the passages. He's the Lord, declared with power to be the Son of God through the resurrection of the dead. Okay, that's beginning of Romans. That's early. That's what, early to mid-50s that Paul wrote that. He's already declaring the resurrection within 20 years of the resurrection. That's just unbelievable. Okay, so this isn't made up later. What the Jehovah's Witnesses do is they presume he's not God, that he's merely some kind of unique man, and then they go to the one they encounter, the historical Jesus, and try to overlay that on. So this is a great observation you made, Amy, but people need to know that that is not the way the early church formulated their understanding of who would invent the Trinity, for goodness sake? Who would invent that? You know, Ray Bradbury, right? Some science fiction guy. But no one would think of that. Not any Jews, for goodness sake. You know, God is one, Jews, the Shema in Isaiah 6:4. So what they developed this understanding because of their personal encounter with Jesus and with what he said. Not because they brought some foreign Greek doctrine in and are laying it over the text.
Mm-hmm. Great points. We actually have more on our website that respond specifically to Jehovah's Witness ideas and theology with suggestions about how you can approach these things. Tim has written a couple pieces on this. So if you go and you type in Jehovah's Witness into our search box, you will find more ideas about how to communicate these ideas to them. And of course, Greg, your Trinity, a solution, not a problem, is also a great series you did. I think it's 2 parts. That will be helpful. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Lizzie.
str.org.
Thank you, Greg.
str.org. That's how they can find it. Yeah. We take it for
that
granted.
Is also very helpful.
Go,
str.org, exactly. Well, thank you, Lizzie, and thank you, Tracy, for your questions. If you have a question you've been wanting to ask, what are you waiting for? Send that in through our website with the hashtag STRask, or you can use Twitter, use the hashtag STRask, and we'd love to answer your question.